Hello everyone and welcome to the Commexis cast, all the news you need to know from our inbox to yours. Today we're talking about influencer marketing and how it can help the advocacy stage of the buyer's journey. Hello everyone, I'm Matthew McGrorty, the videographer and podcaster here at Commexis, and today I am joined by the lead strategist at Commexis, Phillip.
Hello.
And CEO and managing partner here at Commexis, Len Ward.
Good afternoon.
So today we're talking about influencer marketing and how that can help with the advocacy stage of the buyer's journey. And before we get too deep into a nice little story I have here, why don't we get a little explanation of what the advocacy stage is? So Phil and Len, why don't you fill some?
Sure. So the advocacy stage is the final stage in our version of the buyer's journey, and what it is converting your clients or your users into advocates for your brand. So they evangelize your brand in places like social media, providing reviews, basically not only legitimizing the brand itself, but showing that that your customer service model works well. And it's again a really big win for you because it's a free version of essentially publicity.
It's kind of like a recommendation that's done online. A lot of times you've heard the term screaming fan. That's exactly what it is. So if somebody shares something on Facebook of a product you have, or again, like Phillip said, leaves a review on Yelp and so forth, these are people who are in the advocacy stage of a buyer's journey.
So when we talk about influencer marketing and when we talk about a lot of these steps in the buyer's journey, they all kind of tend to tie together because they're a journey,
sure.
But also they ideally would loop around a little bit. So for example, in the advocacy step, if somebody is leaving hopefully a positive review of your brand, then somebody who is in the consideration phase will hopefully see that review, and then that will help them bring them to purchase, and then retention, and then advocacy, etc. So the one little thing that I want to get into, I talked on the blog a little bit about how consumer trust is really important in general, but in particular, there's ways that you can build and sustain consumer trust in your brand through influencer advertising. So I'll have a link to that blog post in the podcast description. But the story we talked about there, or one of them, was an eMarketer report about consumer trust and how costly it can be when you lose consumer trust. In particular, the eMarketer article was talking about how brands who have data breaches or they're selling data and users don't know about it, can decrease trust and things like that, while not entirely all related in the sense of there's a lot of brands that aren't selling data and things like that, but data breaches can occur, other bad PR scenarios can occur. So one of the things that is in this article, it says that consumers across all levels of trust, they rated them on low, moderate, and high, were increasing spending in the last 12 months, but low trust consumers decreased spending by large margins. So 43% of low trust consumers increased spending, while 15% decreased. On the other hand, the high trust consumers increased 57%, while they only 4% of them spent less. So basically, a high trust consumer who really trusted the brand in particular, even though there was a data breach, was still willing to spend more, and some of them were only likely to stop spending by a little bit, whereas on the low trust consumers, about 15% of them just dropped completely or stopped spending or spent less. So the reason I bring that up is when we talk about influencer marketing, and as I've mentioned a lot of the times throughout this week, is that consumer trust is really important with that, and that's kind of the whole point of the advocacy stage, is showing other consumers, hey, I really trust this brand, you guys should too. So can you guys just comment on that very slightly before we get into the more influencer marketing angle?
Well, I think it stands to reason and it makes sense. The thing that I find particularly fascinating is that you've got these people who are fully entrenched or already invested in a brand. Let's say Apple is a perfect example, because you've got these people that are absolutely obsessed with Apple and they will buy every new product. I don't think that if they were to suffer a data breach, they would lose those hardcore fans. It's the people in the middle or on the lower end of the spectrum that they're likely to have slough off. But I think that that's kind of something I hadn't considered, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about influencer marketing, obviously advocates who you are paying as influencers, they are advocating for your brand, though it is paid. So that doesn't entirely fit into the step in the sense that you're paying them. But the one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that influencers, by advocating for your brand, can then get more people to come and advocate for your brand, either because they've heard about your brand somewhere, or they've actually experienced experienced the product. I can't tell you the amount of times I've read something and then told my friend or a coworker or something, hey, I read about this and it seemed pretty interesting, even though I hadn't bought it. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. Can you guys talk a little bit about the ways that influencer marketing can help with advocacy?
Well, I think there's an interesting Venn diagram if you look at when you say you've got the advocacy stage and the actual stage where people are doing research and they're doing the consideration stage, because influencer marketing kind of straddles both of those two things, because I think people at least are getting savvy enough to understand that that a paid influencer is somebody that's being compensated for their time and their opinions, but they do understand that this product still is out there and it still exists, but they understand that this is an opinion by a paid person. So it goes further towards the consideration stage. So it takes something that we consider advocacy stage in general, but it puts it firmly in this other spot, because again, it's a paid model as opposed to an organic model.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. So finally, just one of the things I wanted to mention, as I've mentioned throughout the week in my blog post, in the other Commexis Cast episodes, is how important of a factor trust is, trust and authenticity in particular when we're talking about influencer marketing. Obviously, we've mentioned if somebody's advocating for your brand and they're not paid, that is like the ultimate authenticity, the ultimate trust that somebody's giving you. But at the end of the day, influencers could also be used to sort of, I don't want to say mediate bad PR or bad things that are happening, because of course you would hopefully have your own public relations doing that. But at the end of the day, if you are building that trust with that brand and you're building trust with an influencer, they certainly can help you in the sense of increasing that trust.
You made a really salient point there, because you talked about big things. Because you're talking about smaller brands for which influencer marketing becomes such a huge factor, because that can really take them from a small company to a large company, because that audience, if they can piggyback on it, even if it's a paid audience, if you can get your product to in front of the right people by using proper influencers to fit your demographic and your audience, you can really grow. It can really make a huge influx of popularity, and that can really jump you from here to here. And then if you can use traditional methodologies to sustain that growth, it can be a great springboard.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It reminds me of.
But I said yours was a great point. Don't come back on mine.
I'm glad you guys are doing point, because I've added nothing to that.
So one final note I want to mention, actually, because while I was listening to you, I was just thinking about this, is when we talk about, when we've been talking about in this episode about bad PR moves or things like that, to some extent we could even talk about defective products or services that did not completely satisfy for some reason. And we talk a lot about how when you get a bad review, when you're getting customer feedback that is not necessarily positive, it is important to make sure that you are properly responding to that. And one of the things that I was just thinking about while Phillip was talking was how if you have an influencer who you're paying and you're not, perhaps you're allowing them a little bit more creative freedom, perhaps they will be able to give tips based on their own feedback, but also importantly, they can give their audience can also give, if they decide to purchase this product, their own feedback, and then you have a series of people saying, hey, this is something we want to see. Because at the end of the day, unless a negative review is like hyper negative, like they had a really bad time, I've seen tons of products where, this could be improved, and it kind of sucked that it wasn't great. But at the end of the day, a criticism of how you can improve, I personally think, is always somewhat useful, as long as you're willing to listen to.
And to add something, if you don't have a negative review, or if there's nothing negative said about you, then and everything is 100% positive, that's fake. So it's getting a negative review is okay. Having somebody not like your product is okay. The critical thing in advertising and marketing is how do you respond to that? That's everything. So it's that's just something to keep in mind. And we've had how many clients come in and say, this person's saying this about me, or I got a negative review, and it's not the end of the world. It's what you say or how you respond or how you make good on it.
It's an opportunity to enforce your company's culture and explain exactly who you are and how you would handle this. And I think that shows a lot of maturity in the growth of a company as well, especially if you're a small small shop.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank everybody for tuning in to today's episode of the Commexis Cast. Thank you, Phil and Len, for joining me adjacent to the table today. If you guys would like to listen to more of us, you can check us out on the Apple iTunes Podcast Store, on the Google Play Music Store, and the Google Podcast app, as well as TuneIn and Stitcher. And you can watch us in full on YouTube and get nice little social snippets in your social feeds by following us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and IGTV. Thank you very much, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.